All right. Welcome, Wes Barefoot, to the Self-Employment Success Podcast.
Hey, Leland, thanks for having me, man. I've been looking forward to this.
Yeah, I'm excited for today's conversation as well. Let's just jump right on in. Tell the listeners who you are, what you do, kind of where your business stands today.
Yeah, I'm happy to. So I'm the founder and president of Path to Freedom, which is a franchise consulting firm. And so as a franchise consultant, I specialize in franchise ownership. My wife and I own franchise businesses ourselves as franchisees, recently sold one of our franchise businesses. I've worked on the franchisor side as well. I've worked for numerous franchise brands earlier in my career. So I've kind of sat on both sides of the table, which now puts me in a good position to, really help educate others that are interested in learning about franchise ownership and what it entails, and to take it even a step further to help them really take a more methodical approach to identifying the type of franchise business that makes sense for them to own, narrowing it down to a more manageable list of specific franchises that they really want to look into and research in detail. And so I'm really there as a coach or a guide to help them navigate this entire process, figuring out, could owning a franchise make sense for me? And if so, what's the right type of franchise? What are specific brands that meet the criteria that we've identified the right type of business would look like for you? And then really guiding through all the due diligence that's necessary, for anyone to get to the point of being ready to actually invest in a franchise business. And so it's a very overwhelming process for the vast majority of people. And my role is really just to give them a more methodical approach to it. And I work with a lot of different franchise companies. So on the one hand, I'm working with individuals, through the process I kind of just outlined. On the other hand, I'm, always connecting with, learning about a wide variety of franchise businesses. Right now, I work with about 250 or so different franchise brands across a wide variety of industries, wide range of, capital requirements. And I spend a lot of time vetting the brands that I work with to make sure they meet the criteria that I'm looking for to feel confident recommending a franchise to someone.
So I'm excited to dive into this topic because franchising is a wonderful path into self-employment. Like, some people don't want to go, hey, I'm going to put all of my money in and just bootstrap it myself, whatever business, and build it up. It's too much risk. So sometimes
Yeah.
coming into a franchise where, hey, we have an outline, like we've have other people who've done this. We've got a bigger like mothership business that's going to kind of give us all the resources, can really be a quick path to success for a lot of people. Obviously, it's
Yeah.
still hard work. So your job is, hey, for someone who has that entrepreneurial itch, who has the drive for self-employment, but may not know exactly what they want. They haven't invented a new widget. They don't
Exactly.
have the specific vision. They have the vision for entrepreneurship. You say, all right, let's figure out what you want. Let's figure out who you are, kind of what your resources are, what your desire is for this vision. And then you kind of help match them with, well, these businesses you can buy into and be an owner of the franchise and kind of take off from there. Is that
Yeah.
high
Spot on.
level correct?
Yeah. 100%. I mean, an easy comparison is, you know, to a real estate agent, right? If you were looking for a house and if you had a good, real estate agent that was going to help you find the right house for you, you're probably going to spend some time on the front end with that real estate agent talking about, what's important to you in a house, right? Do you want something with a great
Mm,
backyard because you like to entertain and, you and the family like to spend a lot of time outside? How many kids do you have? How many bedrooms do you need? What do you want the kitchen and entertainment area to look like? There's all these criteria that, some of which is going to be very important to you, but may not be as important to the next person. And so a good real estate agent is going to get clear on what it is you're really looking to get out of the right home for you. And then they're going to go off and leverage relationships, their knowledge of the market, all of their expertise, and then bring you back a short list of options that really meet the criteria that you've identified with them. So very, very similar to what I'm doing just with franchise businesses.
In that model of serving someone is ultimately what everybody wants. Like, people don't want you to be like, a real estate agent isn't like pushing this house. Here's the house
Yeah,
you want.
it
Here's the
shouldn't
house you
be.
want. They're taking the time to really understand you and your desires and your family. And that's similar to what I do of, hey, there's a million financial products out there you can invest in, but what's the actual life you want? What are we
Yes,
trying to build? And that way I can come and say, this is the clearest path to your goal. And that's what you're doing, it sounds like, with franchise businesses. What is the vision?
exactly. And it's my favorite thing about, this type of work, because earlier in my career, I worked for a couple of different franchisors. So that's kind of the national corporate level of a franchise. And a lot of what I did for the brands that I worked for was franchise sales and development. So I was responsible for essentially selling new franchises, recruiting in new franchisees. And to do that right in any franchise, you still shouldn't really be selling, in the way a lot of people think of selling, like, high pressure sales tactics. It shouldn't be that,
Mm-hmm.
because the franchising model works when it's done right, because it's a partnership between the franchisee and the franchisor, and it's mutually beneficial. And so smart franchisors realize they don't want just anyone as a franchisee, anyone that's willing to, pay them a fee and sign an agreement. They want people that, really understand what the business is, what it's going to take to be successful. And they have a realistic understanding of the challenges that the business is going to have, because any of these businesses will have challenges and there's no
Yep.
guarantee of success. And so anyways, the sales process should not be, this hardcore sales process, but at the same time, it was my job to sell, right? And I had goals
Yeah.
and quotas. And at the end of the day, if someone wasn't a right fit for the brand that I was representing, that was kind of the end of the road in terms of my ability to help them out. And so now, as a consultant, where I don't work directly for any one brand, I've got a wide variety of really high quality franchise businesses that I work with. I can really dig in and get to know the people that I'm working with. And, there's so much that has to fall in line, for it to make sense for someone to make the transition into business ownership.
Mm.
It's a big life change, right? So there's a lot of stars that have to align, if you will. And so it's not uncommon for me to, work with someone for a year, 2 years, 3 years, even if it's off and on, until the timing is ideal, and until we find the right opportunity for them. And on top of that, I'm not selling anything, which is something that I really enjoy about it. I'm more of a guide or a coach, and I'm kind of connecting dots. And
Mm.
that's, I think, what I enjoy most out of what I'm doing. Plus, I nerd out on this stuff. I love spending, a good chunk of my time just researching different franchises and different business models, and really kind of getting in the weeds. It's a fun business for me to be a part of. I really enjoy it.
Well, and I really respect that transition. As you know, I was in a similar boat where I was in a financial advisor space that was like, I'm representing this company. So
Yeah.
I'm selling their products. My job is to go get new clients into these investments. And it was just so transactional. So making the transition to, hey, I can help you get into any investment product, but I'm representing you, the client,
Yep.
is so much of a healthier position to be. Because it's all like, at the end of the day, business is sales. Like,
Yeah.
I'm selling myself and my services more than I'm selling some other company's products.
Totally.
But again, it's from a truly like authentic relational perspective, which is what you're doing as well. Is like, hey, we're not on a time crunch here. We're here to help you build your dreams. and I can help you do that. And so it can be a real win-win, because nobody gets into entrepreneurship because they love working late nights, weekends, holidays, figuring out how to pay their own taxes. Like, that's not why we do it.
No,
We get into
not at
it
all.
because we have a vision of freedom, of supporting our family better than we can as a W-2 employee. And that's kind of what you're doing, is saying, all right, you have this vision. What is that?
Yep.
And now let's put the pieces together, which is so
Yeah,
much more
exactly. And
fulfilling.
and we spend a lot of time, up front really talking about and getting clear on what that vision is, because the the business itself is really nothing more than a vehicle, right? A vehicle
Mhm.
to help you get where it is you want to go. And one of the biggest things I've learned in doing this, and I obviously was somewhat intentional in my branding, calling the business Path to Freedom, because that is a very core theme of what most people are looking for more of when they decide to explore business ownership. They want more freedom. But I've also
Mm.
learned that freedom means different things to different people and can look different. There's usually some common themes that most people are looking for when they say they want more freedom, but if you drill down deeper, that can look very different from one person to the next. And so you've got all these different, business models out there. Contrary to what a lot of people think, there's a lot more to franchising than just burger joints and sub shops.
Mhm.
The types of franchises my wife and I own and have owned are in the home service, home improvement categories, right? I work with a lot of brands that are in fitness, health, wellness, senior care, childhood enrichment, automotive services, B2B services. I mean, the lists go on and on. And so the point of that is there's all these different business models, and with different business models come different roles and responsibilities for the franchise owner. And so before I start talking about industries, or certainly before I start talking about specific franchises with anyone, we really spend some time talking about, all right, where are you today? And what do you want your life to look like a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now? And what is it about where you are right now that makes you think you're not in a position to accomplish some of these goals that you have? And if I have a
Mm.
really good understanding of that, then that's going to put me in a great position to actually come back and recommend the right types of businesses to help someone actually build the type of life that they want. Because I'm sure you've seen this with many of your clients over the years. Unfortunately, a lot of times people get into business ownership because they want more freedom, they want more control of their time. Usually increased earning potential is a part of it as well. But if people don't get into the right type of business, a lot of times they find out they have less time, maybe even less control of their time, less freedom, even
Mhm.
if the earning potential is more and the financial resources are more. A lot of times that's not worth it if you're working 80-hour weeks and stressed to
Totally.
the max all the time. And so there's numerous things that can cause that, but a lot of times it's simply getting into the wrong type of business, right? And so if you're looking for something with really good quality of life, say you've got young kids and you want to be able to be at baseball practice and games in the evenings and things on the weekends, like maybe a restaurant's not the best business for you because of what would be required of you as the owner day in, day out to really get the right results from the business. That's probably not the best model for you. But there are going to
Mm.
be other business models out there where the role and responsibility of the owner is going to be much better suited to the type of lifestyle that you're looking for. So that's where we start. And then we can really start identifying the right types of business models. And then from there, because look, most people are like, well, look, I want to be in a business that I'm excited about the product or service that we're providing, or I at least believe in the product or service that we're providing, and can see how we're adding value to our clients. That's perfect. You should want that. But you know, getting into a business just because you're passionate about the product or the service, or you would personally be a customer of the business, is not usually the best leading indicator in terms of, how to select the right business to get into.
Totally, because so often you're going to get in so passionate about the product or the service, but having no idea of the quality of life that it's going to bring you
Yeah,
to actually be involved. There's one thing to be like a fan of it and another thing to be in charge of it.
totally.
And I do think that's the beautiful thing about franchise ownership is like many of the bootstrappers, like the entrepreneur, I'm going to build this from the ground up, are the people who go into it with the initial passion for the product or service.
Yeah.
And then they have to kind of learn the business side of it. Whereas with franchise ownership, those people are coming in with a love and desire for entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
And then it's kind of matching the product and service that can kind of fill that. So you're almost coming at it from a different angle on the front end,
You
starting with
are.
the
Which
quality
which
of
is a
life.
it's a really good point, because one of the biggest misconceptions I run into, as I'm talking with people and we work through my process, I may come back and recommend a brand that's in an industry that you have zero experience in, right? And so naturally you might think, well, Wes, I don't and I'll give you an example. Like the first franchise my wife and I got into, we still own this business today. We're in our 6th year of business. It's a franchise called Shelf Genie. And so we sell and install custom pull-out shelving solutions and custom closet solutions. So it's all about home organization and making things more accessible and maximizing storage and all of that, right? I'm not a handy guy, right? I have zero business building shelves, installing shelves. Like, you don't even want me to hang a picture on your wall in your house, okay? Same deal with my wife. She was in pharmaceutical sales before we got into this franchise, and she's really the one that has run in the day-to-day of that business and built it into a very successful business for us. So you would likely think, what do we know about getting into this type of franchise? And so, to your point earlier, because the system for the business is already there, the playbook for the business is already there. The franchisor is not really looking for franchise owners that want to be on the front line of the business swinging the hammer, if you will. They're looking for franchise owners that have, some business savvy and have the desire to build a business that's bigger than just themselves, right? Because if, using the example of Shelf Genie, if they just went out and said, hey, let's go market this to, contractors or carpenters or something to bring them in as franchise owners, they'd end up with a lot of people that essentially bought themselves a job, and the business wouldn't scale in all likelihood, right? The business wouldn't
Mm,
scale to the point that it could, where if you have a business minded owner that may not have the skill set to go out and provide the service directly to the consumer on the front lines, but has some experience or at least some willingness to build a team and invest in that team, right? Bring in people around them that are better qualified for whatever the roles the business requires, so that the owner can spend the vast majority of their time, looking at the big picture. Talk a lot with people about the difference between working in your business and working on your business.
mm-hmm,
Almost every franchisor out there wants the franchisee that has the desire and the ability to work on the business instead of in the business, because that's going to
mm-hmm,
allow them to scale, which is what the franchisor wants. Because if you really drill down and look at the franchisor's business model, they don't really make their money on the initial fees that they get from selling franchises. They make their money through the royalties, which
mm-hmm,
royalties are, usually a small percentage of each franchisee's gross revenue. So the more revenue a franchisee is doing, the better that is for the franchisor. But where this is, a little bit counterintuitive, but that mutual alignment really falls into place between franchisee and franchisor, is that once you get to a point in your business where most, if not all, of your time is spent working on the business instead of in it, that's when you really start benefiting from what most people are looking for in business ownership: more control of your time, more freedom of your schedule, right? Better financial resources. Like, one of the craziest things to my wife and I, as we've built our businesses and started to, really have some success and get to that place where we work more on the business than in it, is almost feeling guilty a little bit sometimes, where it's like, man, we're working less and less in terms of like hours, right? But
Mm-hmm.
the business is growing, the financial rewards are growing. We're getting more of that control of our time and schedule. And so, that was something that we had to wrestle with a little bit at times, where it's like, man, we almost feel bad because we're not out there grinding, putting in 40, 50-hour weeks like we were in the very beginning as we started building these
Mm.
businesses.
Isn't that funny, the like guilt of working less when like that's the dream to begin with?
Yeah.
Like the
Yeah.
psychology of self-employment is a funny thing where you're like,
It
I'm
it
finally seeing the
really
reward
is.
I've wanted, but now I'm like, oh, I feel bad that I'm like not working as much.
Yeah. Well, it really is. And look, if you're doing it right, you really shouldn't feel bad, in my opinion, right? I mean, it's one thing if you're like taking advantage of your employees and working them like dogs and not
Of
taking
course,
very good
yeah.
care of them. But, chances are any control of your schedule that you're going to have if you're using that approach is going to be pretty short lived, because you're probably turning people over very regularly, right? Whereas in our businesses, one of the things we, have enjoyed most about business ownership has been giving other people opportunities to work hard but earn great money. And so, like, in the Shelf Genie business that I've referenced as an example, most of our team has been with us since the first year of the business. We've got a great team. Some of them can make really good money. The Not to get too into the weeds of like how that business is set up, but most of them are technically 1099 contractors. And so some of them, like our installers, the guys that install the products, we've got a guy that's a firefighter. We've got a guy that's a state trooper. They kind of look at Shelf Genie as their side business when they're not at their career job, right? And they've
Hmm.
got a lot of time on a monthly basis that they're not at the station. Um, we've been able to pay these guys more through our company than they make as a firefighter or a state trooper, and
Mm.
that's a really good feeling for us. But it's also what has allowed us to, really get the benefit that we wanted out of business ownership, is give good people good opportunities, give them the training, the support, and the resources that they need to really do well in their job. And as long as you're willing to pay them well for the results that they're generating for you, they're going to be happy to go out and bust their tail for you. And
Mm.
so, that's been the most enjoyable thing, but also, like I said, a little bit counterintuitive, and something that we've had to kind of step back and process, that, hey, we shouldn't feel guilty that, we're really reaping some of the rewards that we set out, to get in starting our own businesses.
Yeah. So, Wes, how did you get into franchising? Like, you're clearly such an expert. Like, you have worked for franchisors, you're a franchise consultant, you are a franchisor, or like you're a franchisee, you
Yeah.
own a franchise. And so, how did you find your way into this space?
Well, I'd love to sit here and tell you it was all part of this master plan, and that it was calculated. But, I went to business school, undergrad. I don't think I ever heard the term franchise mentioned, in 3 years of
Really?
business school or whatever it was. It wasn't something that, you really got taught about or learned about. And, so out of college, if I heard the term franchising, I would have, just like a lot of people, thought, oh, McDonald's, Subway, maybe even hotels. But, in my mind, it was pretty much food businesses, right? And it wasn't something that was on my radar. And, so I got out of school, and I, wanted the corporate career and wanted to kind of climb the corporate ladder. And we're probably pretty close in age, Leland. I got out of college in '09, so not exactly an ideal job market at the time. The economy was really kind of in the tank, and there just weren't a lot of companies out there looking to hire a kid right out of school with no real work experience. one of the few companies that was Enterprise Rent-A-Car, and they have what they call their management training program. And so I was able to plug in with them and work there for about 3 years, and, worked my way up to a branch manager level. And, that was great for a couple of reasons. One, I just learned a ton doing it. You also, work your tail off for, not a ton of income, comparatively speaking. But, as you work your way up, they really put you in a position where you're kind of running your own business, right? As an assistant branch manager, as a branch manager, you have a lot of autonomy. You're responsible for your branch, the employees that work there, the profitability, and, you're largely compensated off of the profitability of your branch that you run. And so, that was great in terms of just starting to really understand profit and loss, and, how as an owner or someone responsible for, a business, you can positively or negatively impact the profitability. And so at the time, I didn't know that, that would be so instrumental in helping us build our own businesses one day. But the other really valuable thing that came out of that, and I didn't know this at the time, but looking back on it, I can pretty clearly see that it pretty quickly taught me that I did not want to, spend 10, 15, 20 years of my career in kind of the corporate rat race and trying to climb, that corporate ladder. Because what I saw at Enterprise, and they're structured similarly to most companies, one thing's different. They only promote from within, right? So you would think if you start, more opportunity to move up, right? Because you're not having to compete with people from outside of the company that may be interviewing for positions higher up. But like most big companies, it really starts to bottleneck the higher up you get in the company. And so, I had managers, area managers and such, that had been with the company for 15, 20 years. These were guys that I learned a ton from and had a lot of respect for. And they'd been in the same role for like 10 years, and they weren't going anywhere unless someone above them died, got fired, or if they were willing to pick their families up and move them to wherever in the country a position opened up that they were able to interview for, probably against hundreds of other people throwing for the same position, and get offered the job. And so that was a really valuable lesson for me. And this all happened in Louisiana. I'm in North Carolina now, born and raised, chased a girl down to Louisiana after college. Fortunately, she's my wife now. So that part of it worked out.
That worked out.
It worked out. Yeah. Yeah, that's a long way to go and come back empty handed. But, I don't know if she would say it worked out, but, it worked out for me. I definitely married up, and I'm playing above my pay grade there. But, anyways, we come back to North Carolina after she gets done with college, and I was able to transfer with Enterprise, but I had to take a step back, 2 steps back to do so. Anyways, long story short, I just kind of started looking to see what else was out there. And I met these guys in Wilmington, North Carolina, where we live now, that had started a company a few years prior, and they had recently started franchising the business. And so they were young, they were small, they were in growth mode, they were looking to staff up. I liked the founders. I didn't know anything about franchising or the industry that they were in, which was like medical device and accessibility equipment. But it felt fast. It felt like a startup. It just felt interesting, right? So that's how I kind of fell backwards into franchising, and one thing led to another. I was able to really kind of grow with that company. And that's where I first got into franchise sales and helped, take them to a national brand, and even into Canada. And then that opened up doors to go work for another franchisor, which was actually Shelf Genie. And then that's how we ended up buying our first franchise. So definitely a roundabout way of doing it. One of those things I think about pretty often, where I'm like, man, what if one thing would have gone different? There's no way, I would have found franchising, and all the doors that have opened since then would have opened.
Well, and maybe listening to this podcast is that moment for someone else. Like,
Yeah.
if I had never listened to that podcast, I would have never So how did you
Yeah.
get into franchise consulting? Like, when did you create Path to Freedom? It makes sense kind of how you wound your way into owning franchises,
Yeah.
but that next step of, hey, now I want to help other people do this.
Yeah. So started the company about 4 years ago, and it wasn't like I had this revolutionary idea that, oh, I should, kind of be a consultant where I'm not selling franchises or working directly for franchises, but I'm just kind of helping people navigate the process. There's other franchise consultants out there. There's people that have been doing this for, 25, 30 years at this point. When I worked for the different brands that I worked for and was responsible for selling the franchises, that's how we got a lot of our franchisees, was from working with these franchise consultants, right? So when I had those roles, a big part of my job was getting out and meeting and networking with franchise consultants, and really educating them on our business and the type of franchise owners we were looking for, and who tended to do well as an owner with our brand, because that's where a lot of our leads or referrals would come from. And so I got an understanding of how that franchise consulting world worked through all of that. And I mean, I can
Mm,
remember going back to the first brand I worked for, the very first, I mean, I was probably a month or two in at this time. And in franchising, the franchisor hosts what they call a discovery day, right? So if someone's been researching the franchise and is considering becoming a franchisee, one of the final kind of formal due diligence steps you would go through is you would go to a discovery day, which is usually at the franchisor's headquarters. And, it's really a chance for you as a prospective franchisee and the leadership team of the franchisor to sit down and meet face to face and really just spend some time getting to know each other and make sure everyone feels good about a partnership, right? So remember the first discovery day I was at for this first brand, and had a few groups of people coming in that were considering becoming franchisees, and one of them had a franchise consultant come with them. And I just remember one of the founders explaining to me who that person was, what their role and kind of the grand scheme of things was. And I can remember thinking at that point in time, like, man, that's something I would really enjoy doing myself at some point. And never really thought that it would become a reality, or would happen as quickly as it was able to. But that's how I got into it. And the drive there was kind of what I said earlier. I loved working for the brands that I worked for earlier in my career, but um you're just kind of limited, right? You have
mhm.
one offering pretty much. And so I met a lot of great people when I represented those brands, and it just became clear for one reason or another that they weren't the right fit for our franchise, or vice versa. And I just wasn't in a position to help them any longer. And so that was part of it. The other part of it was we started having kids and having a family, and I traveled a ton. So I wanted more flexibility and more control. And this, I started Path to Freedom after we started our first franchise business. And so it was really because of our first franchise that I was able to, you know, pretty comfortably walk away from pretty good gig with a, nice base salary, plenty of commission opportunity, good benefits, because we had been building our Shelf Genie franchise for a year and a half by the time I did that. And so we had good income from the business that, made it a lot less intimidating to walk away from the W-2 job and income. So a lot of it was driven by what we've talked about today. Just wanted more control of my time and schedule, and
Mhm.
that's been great. We've got 3 young kids now, and I'm kind of able to do as much or as little of the consulting work as I want to.
That's awesome. So, franchising has tons and tons of pros to it. If I'm the entrepreneur, I want to get into a business, there's so much opportunity for how much you're in it, what it requires of you, what it costs up front, the freedom. What would be some of the cons or things that, if we're playing devil's advocate on
Yeah.
franchises?
It's absolutely worth talking about because it's not a perfect model and it's not going to be for everyone. And the first kind of con I'll mention, I'll tie it back into, what you said about franchising having a lot of pros. One of the cons is that not all franchises are created equally, right? And so
Mm,
there are plenty of franchise businesses out there that there's really no pros to it at all. If you really dig in and know what you're looking for and understand what the franchise is providing. And so one of the things I talk a lot about on my podcast and to people that I'm working with is that, you know, franchising when it's done right, right? Like I use that phrase all the time because it's like anything else in this world. There's great franchises, there's terrible franchises, and there's everything in between, right? There's
hmm
new, young, emerging franchises that will be great one day, but they're not there yet. They're still learning and figuring it out. And so that's important to understand and to always keep in mind. In general, though, even taking into consideration great franchises, some of the cons, people may look at or view as cons. One, there's parameters, right? You do enter into a franchise agreement, with the franchisor, right? And those agreements are going to have guardrails in terms of what you can and can't do as a franchise owner, right? So, a lot of people listening have probably seen the movie The Founder at one point
hmm
with was Michael Keaton.
Yep.
Anyways, Ray Kroc. It's about Ray Kroc and building McDonald's. And there's a point in the movie where they're first starting to really get some franchisees, and he gets really pissed off because he finds out that some of the franchisees are selling pizza, and like they've just totally changed the menu from what it was supposed to be. That's a really good example of where, like, in most franchises, you're going to be limited in how much you can innovate as a franchisee.
Mm,
And so for some people that are very, very entrepreneurial and kind of just want to, they want to be over here doing this today, but then they have this idea over here that they want to chase, and they're, just they want to be all over the place. A franchise is probably not going to feel very comfortable for them.
mm,
In some ways, a franchise can be limited in its growth potential as well, right? I mean, most franchises are territory based, right? And that can look different depending on if you have a franchise that's more of a brick and mortar storefront model versus something that's more service based, where you're going out to your customers to provide a product or a service. But either way, you have a territory that you are kind of limited in terms of where you can go and offer your products or services. And you see this all the time where franchisees scale through a single brand by adding more territory or adding more locations, but without doing that, you're going to be somewhat limited in your growth potential. So those are a few of the cons. Maybe not everyone would view that as cons, but certainly some, especially very entrepreneurial people, would. One thing I'll add on to that, and then we can move on, I guess. But I don't want people to take away from that if you own a franchise, you don't get to be entrepreneurial at all, and you
mm,
don't get to innovate at all. This is another thing I talk a lot about with people as we're working with. Another good example where one type of franchise could be a great fit for one person, but not a great fit for the next person, because franchises, you've got brands like McDonald's, right? That globally known, been around for a very long time, very well established, right? Not a whole lot of innovation going on at this point at the franchisee level with a brand like McDonald's, right? And that's great for
mm.
some people, right? Think about the person that's maybe an accountant or an engineer or someone, but wants to own their own business, but probably doesn't want something where they've got to really innovate and figure a lot of it out. They just want something that's going to be more plug and play. And I don't mean that to be a stereotype, but um, then there's going to be people that love the idea of business ownership, love a lot of the things that a franchise brings to the table, but would be more excited and more happy to be in something where they can be a little more entrepreneurial and really kind of innovate, right? So something like a Shelf Genie, just because we've used that as an example, where it's more service based, right? Still great systems, still a playbook, still a lot of good resources, but just because of the nature of the business, where you don't have people coming to you, you're going out and developing a market. There's a lot more room for the franchise owners to get creative and to innovate and find new ways to get in front of customers, find new ways to network with referral partners and strategic partnerships. And then there's, what I mentioned earlier, younger emerging brands, right? Which
Mm-hmm.
sometimes can look a little bit riskier because they haven't been around as long. They don't have as much of a track record. But if you can mitigate some of that risk, those can be great for someone that is more entrepreneurial, because the franchisors asking the franchisees as they're growing to help them innovate and help them really refine the business model. So just wanted to kind of point that out, because I don't want people to think that, oh, if you buy a franchise, you don't really do anything entrepreneurial. That doesn't have to be the case at all.
Well, totally. And when it comes to entrepreneurship, there is such a spectrum of like total risk, total reward, total
Yeah.
freedom, to like still risk, still reward, but less of each of those, because you're paying a mothership who, like, you have a royalty, but then you get all these
Hmm.
systems in place that kind of help you move closer towards success quicker, and everything in between. Like everything is kind of on a spectrum of however you want it to be, which is the beautiful thing about franchising, is you get a lot of that spectrum
Yeah.
that you can kind of play in and figure
There,
out, like, with my personality, what makes
there's
the most sense.
there's almost something for everyone. Like, when I work with someone that genuinely wants to get into business ownership, has the financial means to do so, and is not just so entrepreneurial that any confines whatsoever is going to be uncomfortable for them, it is very, very rare that, I can't help them find at least one franchise that checks all of the boxes that they're looking for, and makes a lot of sense for them and is doable and viable for them. So it almost something for everyone, which is surprising, to some, because they just, don't fully see the landscape of all the different types of franchises that are out there. I mean, there's franchises that blow people's mind. I had a franchisor on my podcast a few months ago. They do crime scene and biohazard cleanup.
Whoa.
So, if that's something that you're into, there's a franchise out there for that. But um lot of options out there.
So for you, in your journey from enterprise all the way until now, what surprised you the most about entrepreneurship or your journey of self-employment?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I think the thing that surprised me the most, and my wife as well, because we've talked about this. I mean, one of the things, we touched on earlier, where, there's almost been a little bit of guilt as we've started having some success and really getting out of owning businesses what we wanted in the first place. But, beyond that, what my wife and I have learned is that, and this varies from one person to the next. So this is not, going to apply to everyone necessarily, but what we've really become passionate about is not necessarily the widget that we provide in our businesses, but we've gotten passionate about building great teams in our businesses, empowering those teams and putting them in a position to do well for themselves financially, which I kind of touched on earlier. But in addition to that, providing a service and a customer experience that exceeds our clients' expectations. Right. And again, this won't apply to everyone, right? I realize there are people out there that are like, Wes, all that sounds great, but like, if I'm going to get into a business, I need to like love or be passionate about the product or the service. That's great. Just make sure you look at what we kind of touched on earlier, which is what do you want your lifestyle to look like, and make sure the business model and your role and responsibility as the owner is going to allow for that type of lifestyle if you execute well.
Mm-hmm.
But my wife and I have learned, because I mean, I don't think this came up, but the other franchise that we owned and recently sold was an insulation business. Like, I can tell you one thing, I've never been passionate about insulation in my life. I'm far less passionate about it today than I was the day we got into an insulation business, right? But it's a good business to be in for a lot of different reasons. All right. And one of the things we did well in that business was we provided a far superior customer experience to all of our customers, whether that was a home builder, a homeowner, a contractor or a remodeler, whatever the case is. When it comes to insulation, every insulation company is out there selling the same product. There's no way to differentiate yourself. I've got superior insulation to you. It's all the same stuff for the most part, right? So
Mm.
that's been surprising. I would say pleasantly, surprising, for us, is that we've gotten so much enjoyment out of creating great opportunities for our teams and building great teams, which allows us to provide a superior customer experience, or at least a customer experience that exceeds the expectations of our clients. And now that opens us up to almost any type of business we could ever want to get to in the future, because we're not going to have to be so picky to say, all right, well, we need to really be passionate about the industry or the product or the
Mm.
service.
And what was the low point for you?
Oh man, there's been several, but and I'm sure there will be more. It's a roller coaster, right? But we had, when we started the insulation franchise, we, at this point I had my consulting firm. We had our other Shelf Genie franchise that's really my wife's kind of full-time focus. So, we did it with a business partner as well as an operating partner, right? Who was really going to manage and run the day-to-day in exchange for phantom equity, which probably don't have time to get into what I mean by that. But basically, he would get paid as though he had ownership, and the better he managed the business, the more it grew, and the more, or at least as long as he maintained a certain profit margin, he would get paid as though he had ownership in the company. And so that was the plan, right? Because between my wife and I, neither of us had the bandwidth to go and run another business full time, especially build it from the ground up. And, the goal was get it to where we've got, a decent kind of additional income coming in each month, and build it to the point over the course of 3 to 5 years where we could sell it, and sell it for, a nice multiple of our profits or our EBITDA. First year and a half, the plan was all falling in place. And then, around the time we hit our second year, our operating partner bailed on us. No notice, no heads up, just bailed.
Mm.
And now all of a sudden we've got this, 7-figure plus business with 12 employees and, customers, and, just a business that's moving pretty quick with no one to run the day to day. And so, between my wife and I, our business partner had some personal issues and things going on. So between my wife and I, we had to figure out how to jump in, run this business, keep the other balls that we were juggling in the air. And so anyways, that's the business that we just sold about a month ago at the time of recording this. So
Mm.
there were definitely some low points that came with that, because we understood the business, we knew the business, but hadn't been involved in the day to day. And it's one thing to step into a brand new business and learn it as you're building it. It's a totally another thing to step in, when it's a pretty decent size and moving full speed already. So there were some frustrating down times that came with that. We sold it, but we didn't sell it for the type of multiple that we had intended, when we first set out to do it. So, we came out a little ahead of even, but it wasn't like a financial windfall for us. So definitely some humbling moments there. A lot of great learning lessons that, we'll be able to take and apply going forward. But that whole experience was probably easily the biggest low point.
Yeah, sounds like it. So I ask everybody on the podcast this, and you alluded to it a little bit earlier when you said freedom means different things to different people. I find the same is true of success, probably for similar reasons. But this is a podcast about success. And when you ask anybody on the street, you're going to get a different answer if you ask them,
Yeah.
how do you define success? So for you, Wes, how would you define success? And how will you know if or when you've achieved it?
Yeah. So for me, success is being able to wake up every day and no one to answer to other than my responsibilities that are self-imposed. I guess is how I would put it, right? So, and I can remember, early in my career looking at a mentor of mine that, had multiple businesses, had sold businesses. And I can remember, telling my wife at one point, like, man, you see what Luke's doing? Like, all he does is wake up every day and manage his shit. Like, that's kind of how I came to think of it was, I don't want to have to answer to anyone in terms of an employer, right? So that's part of it, right? Because to me, that's enjoyable, right? It doesn't feel like work, right? I mean, there are days, of course, where you're going to do things that you'd rather not be doing, but when it's yours, it doesn't feel as much like work, right? It's just, it's building. So I like having every day be a little bit different, but my working time is spent managing things that we own and are building. With that, of course, comes the financial component, right? So I'm not the guy that wants to drive a Ferrari or have a yacht. I don't want to have to spend any time stressing about, am I able to take care of my family and give them the type of lifestyle that we want to be able to give them, right? I don't want to have to look at price tags. Doesn't mean I want to live this crazy lavish life, but at the same time, we want to live comfortably. We want to be able to go the places we want to go, do the places we want to go. And so, I think part of the question was, how do you know if you're there yet? My hunch tells me it's one of those things that you probably never completely like wake up one day and you're like, all right, we're there. What do we do now? I think at least the way most entrepreneurs are wired, there's always going to be some drive to kind of keep, pushing things to the next level. But, I would say we're close. We're close in terms of, we don't answer to anyone, other than each other in terms of my wife and I. And, in a way we answer to our customers and our employees because they're our responsibility. But, we spend our working time managing things that we own and that we're building. And, we live a great lifestyle. We're building a beautiful new house on the Intercoastal Waterway in Wilmington, where we live right now. And we don't have to think about the cost of things nearly the way we did 5 or 6 years ago when we were both working for other people at the same time.
Amazing. Well, Wes, thank you so much for being on. Tell the listeners where they can find you. If someone's interested in franchising or learning more, how can they get a hold of you and Path to Freedom?
Yeah. So I'm very active on LinkedIn. Have started putting a lot more emphasis on YouTube. So I host a podcast as well. That's how Leland, you and I connected. You were a guest on the show not that long ago, which was a lot of fun. It's called the Path to Freedom podcast. It's on any of the podcast platforms that are out there. We also post all of the full episodes with video format on YouTube, and have started putting a lot more time into YouTube, doing other video content, all designed to be educational in nature. A lot of it focused on franchising, but not exclusively to franchising. I love talking to successful entrepreneurs and learning from them and sharing their stories. So YouTube, the podcast, LinkedIn, I have a website as well, but in terms of like what I hope is good, valuable content, most of that'll be on the podcast and YouTube, and we'll make sure you have links to all of that to put in the show notes.
Yeah, we will make sure all of that is in the show notes for anybody who's interested. So go check them out. All right, Wes, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. This was a lot of fun. Really appreciate the opportunity, and thanks for what you're doing, man. You're providing a much needed service to small business owners and people that are self-employed, and so wish more people were approaching it the way that you are. Selfishly for you, it's probably good that not as many people are, but keep up the great work, man. It's a much needed service.
I appreciate that.